ready? Okay. All right, a little of FYI information before we get started. Most of you know I'm trained as an accountant, and accountants are ordinarily pretty analytical. And so I had an analytical moment the other day as I was preparing this presentation for tonight, and I discovered that through last week we were 50% exactly through the available Wednesday nights in this quarter. Now we're supposed to study the Gospel of Matthew in this quarter. Through last week we were 50% of the way through and 26% through the material. And my analytical view said, ain't gonna work, Raj. And so I communicated with my good friend and brother Neil and persuaded him, I believe, that we're going to retool and not go through Matthew like General Patton went through Northern Europe. And only Nix remembers how that happened, but it was pretty speedily. We're going to slow down a little bit. This was not intended to be a verse-by-verse study, but the more I get into this and look at this, if you're looking at the things that happened, it's hard to say that every verse doesn't have some significance to it, especially when you link two or three of them together. So we're retooling, and we're going to go through Matthew, hopefully covering two chapters, at least two chapters a week. Some of them are a little longer than others. We may break in the middle of some chapters sometime, but we're going to extend over into the next quarter to the extent that we need to. So, okay, let's resume then. Last week we were in Matthew chapter 9, but we only got as far as right about verse, I think it's a 9:27. But let's kind of give a little bit of a review of what's happened thus far, at least in the last couple of chapters of Matthew. Last week, with Neil leading us, we talked about three miracles that occurred in Matthew chapter 9. First of all, the paralyzed man was healed, but more importantly, his sins were forgiven. That creates a confrontation of sorts, raises the attention, raises the eyebrows of the Pharisees a little bit. Jesus not only heals the paralyzed man, but he forgives his sins. Secondly, life is restored to the ruler's daughter, and then third, the hemorrhaging woman is healed. And then Matthew intersperses some other comments about his first encounter with Jesus and some instructions on eating with sinners and some clarification on fasting. Okay, now, I didn't think about this, I guess, until preparing this week, but you read in a couple of places, not only in chapter 9, but in 8 and then in 10 that follows, you read enough to think that, it's not like Jesus is at point A and all of these events occur and all these people see it, and then he goes to point B and some other event or miracle occurs and all these people see it, and then point C, different places, because you see on a number of occasions that there are people following Jesus. So it's like he's moving from place to place, but at least some of the people are apparently witnessing all these things that are going on. That's important to remember, and I'll get back to that in a minute. But I want you to think about that. It's not an isolated event that a few people hear and see and witness, and another isolated event. They're all kind of tied together. We're going to start in chapter 9, verse 27 tonight, and there's here two more miracles that follow. First, sight is restored to two blind men. This is the fourth miracle. But I want you to notice in verse, I believe, 27, and let me ask the question, and somebody's going to have to answer, or we're going to stop. What had these two blind men been doing? What were they doing? What had they been doing? They were following him. So this is not their first observation. They're blind men, but I'll use that word. It's not their first encounter. They've been following him. We don't know for how long. We don't know what all they've seen, but they are following Jesus, even though they are blind. Now, you have to think, since they appear to be two blind men together, maybe they're helping one another along, maybe they're getting some help, but they've been following Jesus. But the great thing of importance here is, how did they address Jesus? What did they say to him? Son of David, which is another way of saying the M word. What is it? Messiah, son of David, Messiah. So what's the great irony here? All these people following Jesus, and what do the two blind men see? He's the Messiah. They've got more insight than all of these people with eyesight have ability to see. So keep in mind that perhaps these two men are some of the ones that are benefiting from some of these events that have occurred. They see Jesus as the Son of David or the Messiah. They have spiritual insight, even though their physical sight is limited. Now, there's another occurrence of two blind men, I think in chapter 20, and they effectively say the same thing, O Lord, Son of David. Very interesting that all of these people that are surrounding Jesus, we have four blind men that recognize him as the Son of David, the Messiah, and some of the people who should have had clear eyesight don't see that. Now, a little bit of a downer here. Jesus gives them sort of a stern warning not to let this be known. Don't broadcast this. Don't stand on the rooftops and shout it out. But they don't do that. They do let it be known. Neil covered last week why Jesus made that request. But in case somebody wasn't here, it's important to know that. Well, somebody remember, why did Jesus want the blind men not to let it be known that they had been healed, that they could now see? What's his purpose? I think it's twofold. We really covered one of them pretty well last week. What is it? What's Jesus really interested in? Their what? Their spiritual condition, not their physical condition. He's interested in giving them some spiritual benefit, not the physical benefit. Now, the physical benefit, of course, helps, but that's not his main purpose. Now, also, I have to think that I won't call it a secondary purpose, maybe a companion purpose, is that the time is just not right. Jesus has a lot of things that need to be done, and he's got some, I'm sure he's got this mapped out in his mind, and it's just not the right time because he didn't want to be overwhelmed with requests for physical healing. Takes away from his spiritual purpose. Jump ahead a couple of verses, 32 through 34, miracle number 5. Here we've got a man, even, in my judgment at least, even more troubled than the blind men because they're mute and they're demon-possessed. We had the instance a chapter or so ago where the demon or demons were a problem, and they wound up, in effect, asking Jesus, let us go somewhere else, ask for permission to go out. Well, we don't see any conversation between these demons and Jesus, but we do know that they're cast out, and the moment they're cast out, the man speaks. What's the reaction of the multitudes? What do? What's the M word there? They marvel. They marvel. They say, it was never seen like this in Israel. And it's like, I don't want to paraphrase where I shouldn't, but it's like they're looking at one another and they say, can you believe this? Can you believe this? We've never seen anything like this. And now they are perhaps thinking what? What are they thinking? We've never seen anything like a mute being healed and blind men now seeing. So what are they thinking? Maybe what? Maybe this is the Messiah. Maybe this is the Messiah. It's like miracle 1 is notable. Miracle 2 is notable. Miracle 3 is notable. But these miracles aren't adding up. They're multiplying. And as we all know, a geometric progression moves a lot faster than an arithmetic progression. It's not 1, 2, 3. It's 1, 2, 4, 8, so forth. It just moves faster. Well, when that marveling starts, it comes immediately to the attention of who? Who's sitting around taking pot shots at Jesus? The Pharisees, yeah. Now, well, here's what their response is. He's really just casting out demons by the power of demons. So what do you read into that? What are they really saying? What's their, it kind of reminds me, maybe I shouldn't go here, but I'm going anyhow. It kind of reminds me of today's politicians. When the politician gets on the hot seat, what does he or she sometimes do? What do? I heard somebody say it. Blame it on somebody else, or more particularly, what do they try to do? Change the subject. Yeah. See, even the Pharisees now have opened their eyes a little bit, and they see that all these things are happening, and there really is no explanation for it except what? He's God. He's deity. That's all they conclude. So what they're trying to do is make an excuse so that it distracts the people from what Jesus is trying to accomplish. And they are willing, as we later learn, to go to extremes to do that. But right now, they just are making an excuse. They are acknowledging early, I think, that Jesus is really who he says he is. They don't have the guts, because they've got self-serving interest. They don't have the guts to really make the full acknowledgement and to mislead the people, or to keep misleading the people. But they're getting the message too. The sad thing about it, though, is that the Pharisees had so much control over the crowds, the everyday Jews, that they just wouldn't allow the message that Jesus is proclaiming to penetrate. They wanted to keep throwing these shields out, and this is just the latest shield. Let's look at the last 4 verses, 38 or 35 through 38, and all this unfolds, as the text says there, in all the cities and villages. It's happening everywhere. Jesus is going from place to place. The people are following him, and all these things are happening. Now, Neil mentioned this last week, and I think we need to dwell on it again. There are 3 action verbs, and I think it's verse 35, 3 action verbs that tell what Jesus is doing. What are those action verbs? They all end in ing. Teaching, proclaiming, and healing. Teaching, proclaiming, and healing. Now, I don't know. I'm certainly not a Greek scholar. I wouldn't know Greek if it was put in front of me. I'd have thought somebody, chicken scratched on some ink on a paper. Wouldn't be any different to me, but and maybe Matthew laid it out the way I envisioned he did. Maybe he didn't. But teaching, proclaiming, and healing. Jesus is teaching the people, and he's saying a lot of things. We read a lot of it. Probably don't read all of the things that he said. I'm sure we did. But he's teaching, and the people are hearing the things that they should have been understanding from what the Pharisees have told them years and years. Of course, most of them couldn't read the scriptures, but he's teaching them. And that part of that teaching process is proclaiming. And what is he really proclaiming in that process? There's 7 of them in the Gospel of John. They're called the I am statements. I am. And we don't have time to get over in John's Gospel and look at those 7 I am statements. But his teaching, sort of, the next step in that teaching process is the proclaiming. And they're sort of intertwined. He can't teach long without proclaiming, and the seal of the deal in the proclamation is the healing process. But these things are sort of happening in that order. He teaches, he proclaims, he heals. And it really, even if you turn those around, the healing process, which could only be done by deity, was part of the proclamation process. That's what he's proclaiming. And that in and of itself is teaching too. What's his motivation? Neil mentioned this last week. Verse 36. What's his motivation? Compassion, yeah. And I've told you this before, and maybe it's immature, maybe it's childish on my part, but sometimes when I read the scriptures, this happens in Acts perhaps more than anywhere else, but certainly in the Gospels. It's almost like I see myself standing in the background or viewing it from a tower or something. I see all these things unfolding, and here I see Jesus just sort of falling apart, lamenting. It's like he's God and he understands what's going on. In some respects, he's not surprised. But here, he's just overwhelmed with the fact that the people are so depressed and so distressed that it almost breaks him down. I think he realizes here, maybe he realized it before, but here I see him clearly realizing that here are all these Jewish people. Here are the Pharisees and the scribes over here. Here are the rest of the Jewish people. And all of the Jewish people, the everyday people, the you and me people, their only view of God is through whatever lens the Pharisees want to hold up. And what are the Pharisees doing all the time? Distorting that lens. It's like last week, I believe it was, I went to the doctor pre-cataract surgery event. And you know, they show me, here's what you're seeing, and here's what you will see when we get rid of that cataract. It's like these poor people, these Jewish people are all walking around with spiritual cataracts. And they're there because the Pharisees have placed them there, and they're not about to do anything to take them away because that works against their own interest. Their view has been totally distorted by the Pharisees, and that's completely broken their spirits. They don't have any spirituality there at all because the Pharisees have sucked it all right out of them or never allowed it to get in. And Jesus is, I think, not only distressed but depressed. And of course, he is compassionate by nature, but I think it kind of beats him down. His response is pretty overwhelming. Verses 37 and 38. He gives instructions to the 12 in response. He says, "Pray the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest." Where's Mike? McGuire, where are you? What's that song? What song does that remind you of? Lord of harvest, send forth reapers. Yeah, it's an old song. I grew up singing that song. I don't know where it is in your songbook, but Lord of harvest, send forth reapers. Now, let's understand the use of this metaphor Jesus is using. These people, I think, would have understood it maybe more than we. Most of us, me especially, don't have a good agriculture background. But I'm going to refer to my favorite farmer, Todd Dickerson. I know what he's doing this time of the year. He's in the cornfield and he's in the bean field. Let's suppose for a minute Todd has no friends, no neighbors. And I know that's a stretch in the imagination. Todd has plenty of both. But let's suppose he has no neighbors and no friends, but the corn's ready for harvest and the soybeans are ready for harvest. But Todd says, I ain't going in that field. I ain't going in any of those fields. What's going to happen to the corn? What's going to happen to the soybeans? What's going to happen? They're going to rot. They're going to rot. In fact, wouldn't it be just the same result to the corn and soybeans if old Todd just went out there and stuck a torch to them and just let it burn? Now, do you see the spiritual implication on that? If somebody doesn't get in there and get that harvest, it's going to burn. It's going to be completely worthless. And I think that's what Jesus is saying. Lord of harvest, send forth reapers, laborers into his harvest. That's what he's trying to do. That's what Jesus is telling his disciples. That goes to his logical conclusion. I want you to reflect on this a little bit. Matthew's using some powerful teaching tools here, and I don't think I realized this, and I know it doesn't stop with chapter 9 and into chapter 10. It really goes much deeper into the gospel according to Matthew. But I want you to point out to you these two assertions and three questions that get us to this point right here, even though it doesn't end here. They come from 5 separate sources. Chapter 8, verse 2, we've studied earlier. The leper to Jesus. Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. We talked about it. I think I did that 2 weeks ago. Lord, if you're willing, you can make me clean. Genuine faith. The leper knew that Jesus could make him clean, It's just a matter if Jesus was willing or not. Assertion number 2, the centurion to Jesus, only speak a word, and my servant will be healed. 8:8. Here's the centurion, a Gentile, saying to Jesus, speak a word, and my slave can be healed. Well, that just doesn't make any conceptual sense, does it? Not only is he a Gentile, and Jesus can do something for him, but he can even do something for his slave. And the Jews, you know what they thought of Gentiles, and they thought pretty much as no more than or less to the slaves. Question 1, the disciples to one another when they're on the water, what kind of man is this that even the winds and the waves get still when he just speaks a word? Now, we don't know from reading Matthew's account, we don't know who asked that question, probably Peter. We don't know who asked that question. Maybe a number of them were knocking their heads together and asking it. We don't know how they answered their own question. But I think it became obvious to them that the only way that can happen, it has to be done by deity. Can you? None of us, I don't think, have ever been in a tsunami or even a major tropical storm like they have on the coast here or not. But can you imagine some of those events? Some of you maybe have some of those events when at the speaking of a word it stops. That could only happen with a deity. So that's assertion 1, assertion 2, and question 1. Question 2 from 8:29. The demons to Jesus. What do we have to do with you, Son of God? Have you come to torment us? Even the demons recognize that Jesus is the Son of God. And then question 3, here in chapter 9, 28, verse 28. Do you believe I'm able to do this? That's the blind man and Jesus. And it's Jesus this time saying that to the blind man. Do you believe that I am able to do this? You know, that question, I guess we would call that a rhetorical question. I have no doubt that Jesus knew the answer to that. He knew that the blind man believed that he was able to do that, or else the encounter would have never gotten that far. So I ask myself, and maybe I should ask you, what's our faith level? What assertion has to be made for us to believe all the things that Matthew tells us about Jesus, and all the things that Mark and Luke and Paul later on and John tell us about Jesus? Whatever it is, we can be confident that Jesus knows us well enough to know what questions we're asking. And if we're asking questions and expecting answers, guess what? They've been asked and they've been answered. All the assertions have been made. All the evidence is there. All the questions have been answered either very, very clearly, or they're rhetorical questions for which we can easily glean the answer. Okay, Mike. Good point.
Maybe even spoke to some of the people who've been able. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
But I do know that they believe without seeing.
Yeah. Yeah. The blind man had less compelling evidence than other people did. The other witnesses, I guess, did, because they didn't see it. Okay, with all these goings on, we got these 5 miracles laid out, and again, it's a geometric progression, and everybody's seeing it. The Jews seem to be picking up on it a little bit. The Pharisees are doing their thing. They're trying to squash it before it goes any further. So it's time now for Jesus to say, he's already said, Lord of harvest, send forth reapers. Now it's time for him to gather the laborers and send them into the harvest. And that's where chapter 10 starts. The process of Jesus delegating or commissioning the 12 and instructing the 12 on what to do. He sends them on a well-defined mission trip. Now, they've already been called, they've been with him, but he's sending them out now as apostles. I'll point out, Neil pointed this out to me, that this is really the second great teaching lesson here early in Matthew. The first being the Sermon on the Mount, which was spoken to just everybody that was around, everybody that's in hearing distance. This one is spoken to the 12 only. He gives them very specific power to do precisely the same things that he's been doing. He gives them power over unclean spirits, power over all kinds of diseases, power over every kind of sickness. Now, I'll get off maybe the subject of Matthew a little bit and get to some other scriptures, one of which I'll tell you. The rest of you just have to find them or trust me. Let's not think for a minute. That God, Jesus, no longer has power over diseases and power over sickness. In eternity, God makes all these things new. He sets them all aside. They never make it across the Jordan. They don't go with us. They don't go with anybody. It may be a while before all of us realize the full benefit of that. Let's hope we realize the reality of it and the truth of it while we're on this side of the Jordan, because it gives us a great deal of comfort. Revelation 21:4. What does that say? Some of you great Bible scholars. In heaven, there's going to be no more what? No more tears. It's going to be better. So when I get depressed or down or distressed about diseases and sicknesses, and I've been void of those myself and in my immediate family, I get some comfort on that, because I know it gets better. A couple of observations, and these are my observations. I don't have any authoritative guidance on that other than gleaning something perhaps from scriptures. No support in the gospel accounts for this, but when Paul got ready on his missionary journeys, if any of you are following on Lehman Lerner, you know that we're in Acts, and Paul's missionary journeys, that's an important part in the middle of Acts, really more than the middle. But when Paul went on his missionary journeys, did he say, I'm going to Asia Minor and I'm going to places? Did he just launch out? What did he do? Was it just Paul? No, somebody went with him, didn't it? Somebody went with him. Different people went with him. Now, remember though, that Paul going on these missionary journeys, that's post-resurrection. Here, we're sometime before the resurrection and the ascension, so things are still a little different. Remember, we're still under the Jewish covenant. And we're going on these journeys, and Jesus sends these 12 out. There's no indication that they went in 12 directions. I'm thinking that there might be some possibility that they went in pairs, because this was something very new to them. Now, Jesus gives them some pretty clear instructions. They don't ask questions. We'll get to that in a minute. But they're all quite inexperienced in what Jesus is expecting of them. These 12 people, they're two sets of brothers. Who are they? Bible students, tell me, who are the two sets of brothers? Who? I heard it. Peter, Andrew, James, and John, right? Peter, Andrew, James, and John, they're brothers. Now, one commentary writer that I read said that there's maybe another set of brothers there, Thaddeus and James the Less, or James the Lesser, James the son of Alphaeus. There's some, not in the Bible, but there's some indication elsewhere that makes some commentary writers think that they're brothers as well. So there's either two pairs of brothers or three pairs of brothers. And I would think if you're going in pairs, you go with your brother. Well, in any case, there's going to be Philip and Bartholomew and Matthew and Thomas and Simon the Canaanite, and perhaps Thaddeus and James the Lesser. One of them is going to be paired with whom? Who? Judas. Judas Iscariot. Judas Iscariot. And we don't have anything in the scriptures that later on is a look back by any of the apostles that says When we went out on that limited commission journey, I was paired up with Judas Iscariot, and I strongly suspected that he was what he is. But somebody had to do that. And I wonder if there was a point in time when there was a look back after the ascension, after Pentecost, when they said, wow. Now, I say that to say this. Nobody in this room, I hope we all can be confident of this. Nobody in this room is anywhere close to a Judas Iscariot. Nobody is. We don't know anybody like that. Not in this body of believers. We don't know anybody like that. But here's what I want to ask. Someday, at some point in time, will some faithful brother or sister look back and they say, I remember that Johnson guy, and he wasn't worth a hill of beans. Or I remember Mike, or I remember Jim, or Dale, and boy, they really helped. They helped push the cause of Christ. What are people going to remember about us? What are they going to remember? What did they remember about Judas? They remembered he was a scum, probably. They remembered bad things about Judas. Now, I don't know, maybe the providence of God wasn't going to allow anything to happen to upset that plan of God, but I want people to remember something good about me as I journey down my path. Another observation, verses 2 through 4 of chapter 10. What do we make of this? When Jesus is, or when Matthew is saying, all these people came, who's the first one he mentions? Who's the first one? Who? Peter. Yeah, Peter. Now, I believe there are 4 places in the New Testament where the apostles are named in a list. 3 of them in the Gospels, 1 of them in Acts 1, and of course that list is without Judas. But Peter is mentioned first in all 3 other cases. Now, there's some differences in those cases because of naming issues in there. They're not exactly duplicates one of another, but Peter is always first. I think he was first because he was first in prominence, first in leadership ability. If there was a leader of the pack, a leader of the 12, somebody who could get the work done, I think it was Peter. But there is absolutely nothing in the Bible that says that the prominence of Peter extended beyond his own days. Nothing in the Bible. But yet some people who profess a belief in God very strongly believe that that prominence is eternal. What's different in this commission, this limited commission, than the commission in the end of Matthew? Jesus' commission to go into all the world. What's different about it? Yeah, more restrictive. Go to my people. We're going to look at that a little closer later. But remember, and here's the principal thing you need to remember. We are still under the Jewish dispensation. They can't legally go to the Gentiles to proclaim the Messiah because that was a Jewish thing. And they're still, they would be in transgression of the law if they did that. So that's the major difference. It's limited, go to the house of Israel only. And there are a few other differences, but that's the major one. But I also want to point this out. In this commission, does it apply to us now? There's a limited commission to the Jews and given only to the 12, not to all men everywhere. But does it apply to us? In theory, or absolutely directly, or what? Well, let's look a little later. I think we get some application on it. I'm not going to say it applies, but Jesus' Great Commission in Matthew 28 has less specifics than does the one here. So let's look at some of the specifics that Jesus tells on these to these 12. And see if we can say, well, yeah, if we're going to go into all the world, like Jesus said in Matthew 28, then maybe there's a lesson there for us. I want to look at some questions. All of chapter 10 is really these specific instructions and some follow-up about that. But I want to look at some questions. Really what chapter 10 says is Jesus called them together and he says, go do this. And he says, do this, don't do this, do this. It's a whole discussion of what Jesus tells them to do. But nowhere in that do the disciples, any of the disciples, any of the 12, raise their hand and say, well, let me get some clarification here. And maybe there was some of that, and Matthew just doesn't record it. But I get the impression that Jesus' instructions were so carefully paid attention to and were so specific that there was no need to raise a question. But I want to raise some. Maybe Jesus answered all of these, but here's what the disciples, the 12, may have been thinking. Now remember, they've never done this before. It's never been done before. And Jesus is putting a pretty heavy charge on them. So the first question they might have asked is, well, what exactly do you want us to do? Very clearly he answers that question. He gives them 16 imperative statements. What's an imperative, you English majors? An imperative is what? It's an absolute. Do this. Got to do this. Do this. Okay, he gives them 16 imperative statements. Now, 12 of the 16 are do this. The other 4 are do not do this. And we're not going to read that, but I'm going to kind of fly through it on my notes here and look at these action verbs that are through here. And I'm going to do the do imperatives first. Go to the lost sheep of Israel. Preach the same message as John and Jesus has preached. Heal the sick. Raise the dead. Cleanse the lepers. Cast out demons. Give freely, just as you've received. Ask who is worthy in the city as you enter it for housing and lodging. Remain in the house of the worthy. Greet the house of the worthy. Bring peace to the house that's worthy. And shake the dust from your feet when leaving an unworthy house or an unworthy city. That's 12 of the 16 imperatives. Do imperatives. The 4 do not imperatives. Do not go to the Gentiles. And remember, everyone who wasn't a Jew was considered a Gentile. Do not go to any city of the Samaritans. Again, although there's Jewish background to those Samaritans, they weren't considered Jews. And then the third one would be do not take provisions, don't take anything, resources to sustain your journey. And then finally, toward the end of that section, do not give your peace or blessing to an unworthy one's house. Now, I want to remember that if I look at Paul's summary statement to Timothy about I have finished the course, I've kept the faith, all that, you're familiar with that. We like to think of Paul as everything he did proved to be. Paul was so dedicated and was so effective. He did everything well. But did Paul have 100% success in the things that he was doing? Did he ever get the door slammed in his face? He did. He did. And what did Paul do? What did he do when that happened? Acts 19, I think, is one of the good examples of that. What did he do? He went on somewhere else, didn't he? He went on somewhere else. So I think there's a lesson for us there. I don't want to say that we're going to stumble across people that are unworthy to receive the message, that are just, let them go. I don't want to give you that impression. Everybody needs to hear the message, and we want everybody to be responsive. But there are going to be some situations where we're met with such resistance that our time saving souls is better maybe directed in another direction. And hopefully during that time, the seed that has been planted will find more productive soil. What's the purpose of Jesus sending out these 12 on this limited commission, and did it sufficiently prepare them? Well, I guess we can say that one of them didn't get sufficiently prepared, Judas. There's no priest among them. There's no scribe among them. They're all common people. That commission is different from Matthew 28, but there's some things that we learn even though it's very specific here. There's no record of their success in doing this that I can find in the gospel accounts. Now I know that on the day of Pentecost, there were 3,000 souls responded to Peter's sermon. I have to think that some of those 3,000, maybe most of those 3,000, had heard some of the things about Jesus and even seen some of the things, or that one of these 12 had opened that door even slightly and allowed Peter to push it open a little further so that they would be receptive on the day of Pentecost. We don't know what their success is. I'd kind of like to know that, but there's no harm in me not knowing. I want to get off on one more tangent before we look at these final two questions. I want you to consider 10:15. Look at verse 10:15. Jesus says, it will be more tolerable for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah than for any city that rejects the 12 on their mission, one of the 12. Now, that's a statement of fact. It's going to be more tolerable for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah. We know about Sodom and Gomorrah. And then if you jump over to 11:22, we're not going to spend a lot of time there, but he says, again, it's going to be more tolerable for Tyre and Sidon than for this city of Chorazin in the day of judgment. And then in 11:24, he says it's more tolerable for the land of Sodom than for Capernaum in the day of judgment than for you. So here's three cases where Jesus says it's going to be more tolerable for Sodom and Gomorrah than it is for you. Now, I'm going to ask you, if he's saying there's going to be on the day of judgment, there's going to be situations where it's more tolerable for these folks than it is for these folks, what else is it saying? If it's more tolerable on one hand, what is it on the other hand? More harsh, less tolerable. Okay. Now, does that raise a question to you? Does that raise a question? What is it? Degrees or level of punishment. Yeah. Now, I'm not going to make that assertion that that's very clear from here, but it certainly makes me wonder, and it makes me want to study the Bible even more to find out all that's said in all the context of Scriptures. But if Jesus is saying that you guys think Sodom and Gomorrah have got it bad, what you're doing, it ain't even going to compare. Those guys are going to be sitting around fiddling and writing in the sand and stuff. So keep that in mind. All these Jewish cities reject the Messiah, and that suggests to me that there might be degrees of punishment because they're going to have it worse than Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay, question 2. Here's a question that they didn't ask. There's no indication that they raised their hand. Okay, here's the things you want us to do, the do's and the do nots. How do we do this? What's their expected posture? What's their expected position? Jesus makes that clear. Verse 16, he says, keep your eyes wide open, wise as serpents, harmless as doves. He uses the verb, or the word, behold there, which means pay close attention to this. I think when he's using serpents, harmless as doves, well, what are serpents known for? They're what? They're kind of they're silent, and they're kind of sneak. Did the bell ring? 1. Number 2. Oh my! Thank you, Joyce. Okay, let me fly through the rest of it. Okay, he says that there's danger around every corner. He's telling them to be confident. He's telling them that their endurance must prevail. Question 3 that nobody asked apparently. Why are we doing this? He says we are a family. He uses some analogies there. We must learn to be unafraid, and I think that was one of the principal missions, principal things that they should learn, to prioritize their fears. We're faithful. Verse 32, I believe it is, therefore whoever confesses me before men, him will I confess before our Father is in heaven. That's a key verse in this passage. We're followers of Jesus. Question 4, who benefits from the journey? 2 people benefit. Those who hear, believe, and obey, and those who help make the journey possible. And I will say this, he says in verse 40, I believe it is, he who receives you receives me. Now, not all who hear Jesus believe Jesus. Not all who hear Jesus and believe Jesus obey Jesus. Some people who hear, believe, and obey want to do some cherry picking. They want a cafeteria plan. I'm going to obey this, but not this. But that's not what Jesus is saying. Okay, next week, chapters 11 and 12. These chapters, chapter 11 especially, are what I call the rejection chapters, and there's some other information in there, but the rejections are primarily important. So thank you for being here. I think Neil will be back next week. Thank you very much. You're kind to listen to him.